On the morning of September 3rd, 2018, a 50-year-old Illinois farmer named Earl Braddock sat down in a vinyl chair across from Gerald Phelps at the First National Bank of Gibson City and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. On the paper was a dealer quote from Prairie Implement for a new 2019 John Deere S790 combine with a 12-row corn head and a 35-foot Draper platform. The total at the bottom of the page, including tax, delivery, and the AutoTrack GPS activation package, was $487,000. Gerald Phelps picked up the sheet, put on his reading glasses, looked at the number, and then looked at Earl Braddock the way a man looks at someone who has just walked into traffic. Earl had farmed 640 acres of corn and soybeans outside Gibson City for 23 years. He had banked at First National for every one of those years. He had never missed a payment on anything. Not the operating note, not the farmstead mortgage, not the equipment line, not the grain bin loan he took out in 2006 and paid off 18 months early. His credit score was 812. His debt-to-asset ratio was 19%. His farm was free and clear. His father, Harold, had paid off the land in 1991, 4 years before he died, and Earl had never borrowed against it. He had $41,000 in a farm savings account, $87,000 in a money market, and a 1999 John Deere 9610, combined with 6,800 hours, that he planned to sell at auction for an estimated $40,000 to $45,000 to put toward the down payment. Gerald Phelps set the dealer quote down on his desk, took off his reading glasses and let them hang on the chain, leaned back in his chair, and folded his hands across his stomach. He had been the ag lending officer at First National for 14 years. He had a bachelor's degree in finance from Illinois State, a golf handicap of 11, and a framed photo on his desk of himself shaking hands with the regional director of Farm Credit Services at a conference in Peoria. He had never driven a tractor. He had never walked a bean field. He had never stood in a machine shed at 5 a.m, listening to a combine engine and knowing by the sound whether it would make it through another harvest. "Earl," he said, and the way he said it, leaning on the first syllable, drawing it out like he was explaining something to a child, told Earl everything he needed to know about what was coming next. $487,000 is a significant obligation for an operation your size. I know what it costs. Your 9610 has what, 6,000 hours on it? 6,800. That's still a working machine. Have you considered an S770 instead? Or a certified pre-owned unit? Deere Financial is running a program right now on... I don't want Deere Financial. I want a loan from this bank. That's why I'm sitting in this chair. Gerald smiled. The kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. The kind that says, "I'm about to do you a favor by telling you no." He pulled his financial calculator toward him and punched in numbers without looking at Earl. At current rates, a 7-year note on 487 at 5.2%. You're looking at monthly payments of $6,914. That's $82,968 a year in debt service on a single piece of equipment. He looked up over the rim of his glasses. On 640 acres. I'm aware of how math works, Gerald. If you value stories about the equipment decisions that define a farm, the ones made in quiet, carried for decades and never forgotten. This channel tells them, we don't rush, we don't sell, we just remember. Gerald leaned forward and lowered his voice the way bankers do when they're about to say something they think is wisdom. I've been in ag lending for 14 years, Earl. I've seen a lot of good farmers overextend on one big purchase and lose everything. Combines are depreciating assets. The S790 will be worth $300,000 in 3 years and $200,000 in 5. You'd be underwater before you're halfway through the note. He paused and tapped the calculator with his gold pen. My recommendation, and I say this as someone who has your best interests in mind, is that you stay with the 9610. Maybe put $10,000 into refurbishing the feeder house and the rotor, and revisit this conversation in 2 or 3 years when rates come down. Earl sat perfectly still. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He looked at Gerald Phelps the way he looked at weather, something to be observed and endured, not fought. Then he picked up the dealer quote, folded it once, and put it in the left chest pocket of his flannel shirt. You're going to decline the loan? I'm not declining it. I'm recommending against it. But if you insist, I'll need updated financials, 3 years of tax returns, a current equipment appraisal, and the 9610 auction estimate in writing from a certified appraiser. That'll take 3 to 4 weeks. Earl stood up. I'll have it on your desk by Friday. He had it on Gerald's desk by Thursday. The file was 2 inches thick. Every receipt was organized by year in tabbed manila folders. Every tax return was clean. The 9610 appraisal came in at $43,000 from Mecum Agricultural, higher than Earl's estimate. The debt-to-asset calculation, when the new loan was factored in, came to 27%. Well within the bank's lending guidelines, Gerald Phelps had no legal or financial grounds to deny the loan. He approved it on September 14th, 2018, and signed the paperwork with his gold pen without looking Earl in the eye. But he told the branch manager, Denise Klosterman, that he'd given Earl Braddock the standard caution. And he told the teller. And the teller told the woman at the Farm Bureau office. And the woman at the Farm Bureau office told her husband, who farmed west of Melvin. And by the end of September, half the county had heard some version of the story that Gerald Phelps had tried to talk Earl Braddock out of buying a $500,000 combine because he didn't think the farm could carry it. Earl did not respond to the gossip. He did not explain himself at the co-op elevator or defend the purchase at the diner counter. On October 1st, 2018, a flatbed delivery truck from Prairie Implement pulled into Earl's machine shed lane carrying a factory-new 2019 John Deere S790 combine in Deere green and yellow. The paint so fresh it hurt to look at in the morning sun. The 12-row 612 FC folding corn head sat on a separate trailer behind it. The 35-foot 735 FD Draper platform would arrive the following week. Earl walked around the S790 twice before he climbed into the cab. He sat in the leather seat and put his hands on the armrest controls and looked out through the tinted glass at his 640 acres and did not say a word. Ruth stood on the porch and watched him through the kitchen window. She didn't go out. She knew what this meant. The 9610 had been Harold's last combine, the one he'd bought in 1999, 6 months before the heart attack. It had harvested 20 seasons of Earl's corn and beans. Selling it wasn't just an equipment decision, it was a goodbye. The 9610 sold at the Mecum auction in Bloomington on October 20th for $44,200, $1,200 more than the appraisal. Earl put the check in the farm savings account and applied it to the combine down payment along with the $41,000 from savings. Total down $85,200. Financed balance $401,800. Monthly payment $5,708 over 7 years at 5.2%. Earl harvested his first crop with the S790 in October of 2018, 640 acres of corn, averaging 219 bushels per acre. The S790 cut it in 9 days. The 9610 would have taken 14. The grain loss monitor read 0.3%, half of what the old machine spilled. Earl ran the numbers on the kitchen table the night the last truck pulled out of the field. The 5 fewer harvest days meant he'd beaten the rain that came October 22nd and turned every unharvested field in the county into a mud lot. 3 of his neighbors lost between 15 and 30% of their corn crop to that rain. Earl lost nothing. The S790 had already paid for 1 season's worth of insurance by simply being faster. He made every payment on time, not early, not late, on the first of every month, the exact amount, automatic draft from the farm operating account, $5,708, 12 times a year, drawn on the 15th and posted by the 1st. He set it up the day after the loan closed and never looked at it again. He didn't pay extra principal in the first 2 years. He didn't refinance when rates dropped in 2020. He didn't call Gerald Phelps to renegotiate terms or ask for a payment deferral during the wet spring of 2019 when planting was delayed 3 weeks and every other farmer in the county was on the phone with their lender. He just made the payment, the same way he'd made every payment on everything he'd ever owed, the same way his father had taught him. Steady, even, no drama. Ruth balanced the farm books every month on the kitchen table with a pencil and a yellow legal pad, and every month the number came out the same. They could carry it. The S790 proved itself that first harvest in ways Gerald Phelps's spreadsheet could never have predicted. The grain loss monitor averaged 0.3% across 640 acres, compared to the 9610's historical average of 0.7%. On 219 bushels per acre of corn at $3.60 per bushel, that difference was worth $11,300 in recovered grain. The 5 fewer harvest days meant Earl finished before the October 22nd rain, a storm that dropped 2.5 inches in 9 hours and turned unharvested fields across Ford County into swamps. His neighbor Carl Beckett lost 40 acres of corn standing in 4 inches of water. Keith Molitor, south of Melvin, lost his entire west section, 96 acres of 200-bushel corn that rotted in the field because his old 7720 couldn't keep up with the calendar. Earl lost nothing. The math Gerald Phelps didn't know how to do, the math of time, weather, and what a faster machine means when the sky turns, was the math that mattered. Tom Lindquist stopped by the machine shed one evening in November of 2018 and stood in the doorway, watching Earl grease the S790's feeder house chain. Tom had his spiral notebook in his hand and his pencil behind his ear, and that quiet expression he wore when he was about to ask a question that wasn't really a question. Heard Phelps tried to talk you out of it. He had concerns. You concerned? Earl pulled the grease gun off the Zerk fitting and wiped the nipple with his thumb. I've been farming this ground for 23 years, Tom. I know what it costs, and I know what it earns. Gerald Phelps knows what a spreadsheet says. Those aren't the same thing. Tom wrote something in his notebook and nodded and walked back to his truck. He didn't mention it again, but the next spring, when Gerald Phelps denied a grain bin expansion loan to a young farmer named Brett Hoffman east of Sibley, a loan the Farm Credit Office in Champaign approved 2 weeks later without hesitation, Tom Lindquist brought it up at the Farm Bureau board meeting. Not as an accusation, as a question. How many good loans is First National turning down because Gerald Phelps doesn't understand agriculture? The question sat in that room like a stone in a boot. Nobody answered it out loud. But over the next 12 months, 4 farming operations moved their primary banking to Farm Credit Services, or the Heartland Bank branch in Paxton. Dale Endicott pulled his grain marketing account, $230,000 in annual deposits. The Hoffman family moved their entire operation, checking, savings, operating line, 3 equipment notes. The McLean brothers consolidated with Farm Credit and closed their First National accounts on the same day. Combined deposits lost $1.4 million. Gerald Phelps told the branch manager, Denise Klosterman, it was the interest rate environment. Denise looked at the deposit outflow report and said nothing. She knew what it was. Everyone in Gibson City knew what it was. 2019, 2020, 2021. Earl made every payment. Corn prices rose to $5.20 in 2020 and climbed to $7.68 in 2021, levels nobody had seen since 2012. Earl didn't expand. He didn't buy more land. He didn't upgrade the truck or pour a new shop floor or finance a second planter. He put the windfall into the combine note. In December of 2021, he walked into First National and paid the remaining balance of the S790 loan in full, $163,412 drawn on the farm money market account. The loan had been scheduled to run through September of 2025. Earl paid it off 3 years and 9 months early. Gerald Phelps processed the payoff. He printed the lien release and stamped it and slid it across the desk without comment. He did not congratulate Earl. He did not acknowledge that his recommendation 3 years earlier had been wrong. He adjusted his reading glasses on the chain and said, "Will there be anything else today?" "No," Earl said. He folded the lien release and put it in his left chest pocket, the same pocket where the dealer quote had sat 3 years earlier, and walked out of the bank and drove home. In July of 2022, First National Bank of Gibson City was acquired by a regional holding company out of Springfield called Prairie Heritage Financial Group. The acquisition price was not disclosed, but the real estate listing for the bank building appeared on a commercial brokerage site 3 weeks before the announcement, which told the town everything it needed to know about who had pursued whom. The acquisition was driven by the bank's declining agricultural lending portfolio. The ag loan book had shrunk 41% in 4 years, from $18.6 million to $11 million, as farm after farm moved to lenders who understood that a combine is not a depreciating luxury, but a tool that determines whether a crop makes it out of the field before the weather takes it. A polite way of saying that Gerald Phelps had spent 14 years telling farmers they couldn't afford the equipment they needed, and the farmers had quietly gone somewhere else. The holding company eliminated the Gibson City Ag lending position in the restructuring. Gerald Phelps was offered a consumer lending role at the Springfield headquarters at a 22% pay reduction. He declined and took early retirement at 56. He sold his house in Gibson City and moved to a townhome in Bloomington near the golf course. Nobody at the Farm Bureau Christmas dinner mentioned his name. By the fall of 2023, the S790 had harvested 6 seasons of corn and soybeans on Earl Braddock's 640 acres. It had 2,300 hours on the engine and the separator. The rotor was original. The concaves had been replaced once. The feeder house chain had been tightened twice, and the grain tank auger bearings repacked once. Total maintenance cost over 6 seasons, $14,200. The combine that Gerald Phelps said Earl couldn't afford had paid for itself in saved crop losses, reduced harvest time, and fuel efficiency gains by the end of the 4th season. By the 6th, it had generated an estimated $91,000 in net value, above what the 9610 would have produced over the same period. And it was fully owned, free and clear, sitting in Earl's machine shed with no lien, no payment book, and no banker's signature on a dotted line. Tom Lindquist brought it up once, sitting on the tailgate of his truck at the elevator, while they waited for the grain probe. You ever think about what Phelps said about being underwater? Earl watched the probe drop into the truck bed ahead of them. I think about what my father said. What did Harold say? He said a banker counts what you owe. A farmer counts what the ground gives back. They're not measuring the same thing. Tom wrote it down in his spiral notebook. He didn't say anything else. In the spring of 2026, the John Deere S790 sits in Earl Braddock's machine shed outside Gibson City, with 2,900 hours on the separator and the engine running as clean as the day it was delivered. The green paint still gleams under the overhead lights. The cab glass is spotless. Earl washes it after every harvest day with a chamois and a bucket of warm water, the same way Harold washed the 9610. The leather seat shows the impression of one man's frame, worn in at the hips and the shoulders from 8 seasons of 12-hour days. The GPS calibration has not drifted a quarter inch in 6 years. Earl is 58 now. His oldest son, Nathan, came home to the farm last year, drove up the lane in April with a toolbox in the bed of his truck and said he was done working on other people's equipment. He wanted to farm. Earl handed him the key to the 4230 and said, "Start dissing the South 40. Nathan didn't ask questions. He just drove the tractor out of the pole barn and went to work. This October will be the S790's 9th harvest. Earl has already walked the fields and estimated the yield, 224 bushels per acre on the corn, 61 on the beans. The combine will cut it in 8 days if the weather holds. The payments are done. The lien is released. The title is clean. The machine that Gerald Phelps said Earl could never afford is the most valuable piece of iron on the farm. And it didn't cost Earl a single night's sleep because he never owed more than he could carry, and he never carried more than the ground could give back. Gerald Phelps plays golf 3 times a week in Bloomington. He has a reverse mortgage on the townhome and a Buick with 42,000 miles on it. He tells people at the clubhouse bar that he spent 14 years in agricultural lending and knows the business inside and out. He does not tell them about the farmer in Gibson City who walked into his office with a piece of paper and walked out with a combine and paid it off 3 years early and never once raised his voice. The S790 sits in the shed. The engine is cold. The header is folded. The bin is empty and swept clean. But in 6 weeks, when the corn is dry and the ground is firm and the October light turns the fields to copper, Earl will climb into that cab the way he has climbed into it every fall since 2018. Slowly, with both hands on the rail, one boot on the step, and he will press the start button, and the diesel will roll over, and the separator will spin up, and the header will unfold, and the machine will do what it was built to do. $487,000, 7 years of payments, paid in 4, 9 harvests and counting, every bushel accounted for, every receipt in a manila folder, every dollar earned from the same 640 acres that Harold Braddock paid off in 1991, and Earl Braddock has never borrowed against. The banker said he'd never make the payments. The farmer made every single one, and the combine is still running.